March 15, 2019. That's the date that changed everything for the small coastal town of Mercer's Bay. Population 8,742. It's the date that veteran detective Sarah Chen, a woman with 23 years on the force and a solve rate that made her something of a legend in the Pacific Northwest, encountered something that would shatter her understanding of human nature. To this day, when you mention the Lighthouse case to anyone in law enforcement within a 500-mile radius, you'll see the same reaction. A slight pause. A distant look in their eyes. And then, almost without fail, they'll tell you, that's the one that got away. But this isn't just another cold case gathering dust in some forgotten evidence room. This is different. Because the Lighthouse case isn't cold due to lack of evidence. It isn't unsolved because witnesses refused to talk or because the trail went dead. No, the Lighthouse case remains open because the evidence makes no sense. Because every answer leads to 10 more questions. Because the deeper investigators dug, the more impossible the whole thing became. I've spent the last 14 months investigating this case. I've interviewed 47 people. I've reviewed over 3,000 pages of police reports, witness statements, forensic analyses, and expert testimonies. I've walked the crime scene myself, stood in the exact spots where it all happened, tried to piece together the impossible puzzle that has consumed some of the best investigative minds in the country. And I can tell you this with absolute certainty. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why Detective Chen still wakes up at 3 a.m., unable to shake the feeling that she's missing something obvious. Something that's been right in front of her face this entire time. Before we begin tonight's investigation into one of the most haunting unsolved cases in modern criminal history, I need you to do something for me. If you're fascinated by true crime, if you want to dive deep into the cases that defy explanation, then hit that subscribe button right now. Click the notification bell so you never miss when we upload a new investigation. And if this case grips you the way it's gripped me, share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Now, let's begin. Let me take you back to that Friday morning. March 15, 2019. 6:47 a.m. The call came into the Mercer's Bay Police Department from a local fisherman named Marcus Webb. Marcus, a grizzled 62-year-old who'd been fishing these waters for 40 years, was not a man prone to panic. But when dispatcher Rita Hollings answered his call, she could hear something in his voice she'd never heard before. Not in 15 years of taking emergency calls. "There's something wrong at the Lighthouse," Marcus had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to send someone. Now." The old Beacon Point Lighthouse had been decommissioned in 1987, but it remained a local landmark, standing sentinel on the rocky outcrop about 2 miles north of town. The structure itself was off-limits to the public, fenced off and marked with warning signs, but that never stopped the occasional teenager from trying to break in or tourists from taking photos from the nearby coastal path. Detective Chan arrived on scene at 7:23 a.m., alongside officers Brad Morrison and Jennifer Kim. What they found would become seared into their memories forever. The lighthouse door, a heavy steel barrier that had been padlocked shut, was standing wide open. Not forced. Not damaged. Simply open, as if someone had possessed the key. But here's the first strange detail that still bothers investigators. The padlock was found inside the lighthouse, on the floor near the base of the spiral staircase, still locked. The hasp it had been securing was bent outward, away from the door, as if something had pushed it open from the inside with tremendous force. But that wasn't what Marcus Webb had called about. At the top of the lighthouse, in the lamp room where the beacon had once rotated, they found 7 people. All alive. All seated in a perfect circle on the floor. Their eyes were open, but they weren't responsive. They weren't moving. They were simply there, breathing, blinking occasionally, but otherwise completely catatonic. Detective Chen immediately called for medical assistance and backup. Within 20 minutes, the scene was flooded with EMTs, additional officers, and the town's only ambulance, supplemented by 2 more from neighboring districts. But here's where things get strange. And I mean truly, deeply strange. When the EMTs approached the 7 individuals to begin assessment and treatment, All 7 suddenly, simultaneously, turned their heads to look at the responders. Not gradual. Not one at a time. All at once, with mechanical precision, like 7 puppets controlled by the same string. And then they spoke. All 7 of them in perfect unison, their voices overlapping to create this eerie, harmonized chorus. "We've been waiting for you to understand." Then they collapsed. All 7 of them, crumpling to the ground at exactly the same instant. Over the next 48 hours, as the 7 individuals recovered in Mercer's Bay Medical Center, investigators began piecing together their identities. And this is where the case transitions from strange to absolutely baffling. The 7 people found in the lighthouse had absolutely nothing in common. No social connections. No shared employers. No mutual friends. They ranged in age from 19 to 68. They came from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different parts of the country, different walks of life entirely. Let me introduce you to them. First, there was Thomas Brennan, age 42, a software engineer from Seattle. Thomas had been reported missing by his wife 3 days earlier, on March 12. He'd left for work Tuesday morning and simply never arrived. His car was found in a grocery store parking lot in downtown Seattle, keys still in the ignition, his phone on the passenger seat with the battery dead. Then we have Lucia Morales, 19 years old, a college freshman studying marine biology at Oregon State University. Lucia had been missing for 5 days. She told her roommate she was going to the library on March 10. Campus security footage showed her leaving the library at 8:47 p.m. that night, walking toward the parking structure. She never made it to her car. Christopher Yates, 68, a retired postal worker from Boise, Idaho. Christopher had been on a solo cross-country road trip. His family last heard from him on March 9, when he'd called from a motel in Montana to say he was heading west toward the coast. Naomi Park, 34, a dental hygienist from Portland. Naomi's boyfriend reported her missing on March 11. She'd gone out for her regular morning jog and didn't return. Her phone was found on a trail in Forest Park, its screen shattered. Marcus Wells, no relation to the fisherman who found them, a 57-year-old high school history teacher from Sacramento. Marcus had been on spring break. His husband last saw him on March 8, when Marcus left to go hiking in Northern California. His car was found abandoned on a Forest Service road 3 days later. Then there was Ashley Kim, 23, a graduate student in psychology from Vancouver, British Columbia. Ashley had been reported missing by her thesis advisor on March 13, after she failed to show up for an important presentation. Her apartment showed no signs of disturbance, but her laptop and research notes were gone. And finally, David Okonkwo, 49, a freelance journalist from Chicago who had been traveling the Pacific Northwest researching a book about coastal communities. David's editor last heard from him on March 10. His rental car was found parked at a scenic overlook about 60 miles south of Mercer's Bay. 7 people. 7 completely separate lives. 7 different timelines of disappearance, ranging from 3 to 8 days before they were found. No connections between them that anyone could discover. But here's what haunts Detective Chan the most. When they checked the lighthouse visitor log, a notebook that local urban explorers had been maintaining illegally for years, documenting their break-ins, there was a new entry. Dated March 14, 2019. 1 day before the 7 were discovered. The entry read, 7 come to witness. 7 will remember what was forgotten. The circle is nearly complete. Handwriting analysis was inconclusive. The writing didn't match any of the 7 individuals found in the lighthouse. And the notebook, which should have been locked inside the lighthouse, which should have been inaccessible, had this fresh entry dated the day before. When the 7 regained consciousness, between 6 and 18 hours after being brought to the hospital, the real investigation began. And this is where Detective Chen earned every cent of her salary, because what followed was the most bizarre series of interrogations in the history of American law enforcement. I've listened to all 48 hours of recorded interviews. I've read the transcripts more times than I can count. And I still get chills thinking about them. Let's start with Thomas Brennan, the software engineer. When Detective Chen sat down with him on March 16, Thomas appeared lucid, coherent, and calm. Too calm for someone who'd been missing for 3 days and found in a bizarre catatonic state. "Mr. Brennan," Detective Chen began, "can you tell me what happened to you?" Thomas looked at her with this strange, serene expression. "I was invited," he said simply. "Invited by whom?" "By the Lighthouse." Detective Chen paused. "She's told me that this was the moment she realized this case was going to be different from anything she'd ever worked. Buildings don't invite people, Mr. Brennan." "Who took you to the Lighthouse?" "Nobody took me. I drove myself." "Well, I drove as far as I could, then I walked. It was a long walk. Maybe 12 miles? I'm not sure. Time felt different." "Why did you go to the Lighthouse?" Thomas tilted his head, considering the question. "Have you ever known something without knowing how you know it? Like when you're dreaming, and things just make sense even though they shouldn't?" "Mr. Brennan, I need you to focus. You were reported missing by your wife on March 12th. Where were you between Tuesday morning and Friday morning?" "Walking, mostly. And waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For the others to arrive. We couldn't begin until all 7 were present." Detective Chen leaned forward. "Begin what?" Thomas smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was sad, almost pitying. "We don't remember yet. That's why we're still here. That's why you're still asking questions. But we will remember. Soon." This pattern repeated with all 7 individuals. Different words, different ways of describing it, but the same essential story. Each of them claimed they had been called or invited to the Lighthouse. Each of them had traveled there of their own volition, though none could adequately explain why. Each of them spoke about waiting for the others, even though they insisted they'd never met before and had no knowledge of who the others were or when they'd arrive. Lucia Morales, the college student, told Detective Chen something that made her blood run cold. "It's like someone reached into my brain and flipped a switch. One moment I was walking to my car, thinking about my biology midterm. The next moment, I knew I had to go north. I had to reach the coast. I had to get to the Lighthouse before March 15th. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't a thought exactly. It was just knowledge. Absolute certainty." Christopher Yates, the retired postal worker, said something similar. "I've lived 68 years on this earth, detective. I've raised 3 kids, buried a wife, served in the army, delivered mail in all kinds of weather for 35 years. I'm not prone to flights of fancy. But I'm telling you, something reached out to me while I was sleeping in that motel in Montana. I woke up on March 10th, and I knew I had to drive to Mercer's Bay. I knew I had to get to that lighthouse. And I knew I had to be there by the 15th. The medical examinations revealed no drugs in their systems. No alcohol. No poisons or toxins. No head injuries or signs of trauma. No indication of hypnosis or psychological manipulation that doctors could identify. Brain scans showed normal activity. Blood work came back clean. These were 7 ordinary people who, for reasons nobody could explain, abandoned their lives and traveled, in some cases hundreds of miles, to sit in a circle in an abandoned lighthouse. But it gets stranger. Because when investigators examined the crime scene more thoroughly, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. The forensic team spent 5 days processing the lighthouse from top to bottom. And what they found created more questions than answers. First, the circle where the 7 had been sitting. The floor of the lamproom had been cleaned recently. Not cleaned like someone had swept it, but cleaned meticulously, methodically, as if someone had scrubbed every inch of it. They found traces of industrial-strength cleaning solution, the kind used by professional cleaning crews. But the lighthouse had been abandoned for 32 years. Who cleaned it, and why? Around the perimeter of the circle, scratched into the metal floor with something sharp, were symbols. Not random symbols, but what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. 7 symbols, evenly spaced, forming the circle's boundary. The forensic team photographed them extensively. When Detective Chen consulted with linguistics experts, anthropologists, and scholars of ancient texts, the responses were fascinating and deeply troubling. For different experts, working independently, identified elements of the symbols as being similar to astronomical notations used by various ancient cultures: Mayan, Babylonian, Chinese, and Aboriginal Australian. But here's the problem. These weren't perfect matches. They were variations, like someone had taken elements from multiple ancient astronomical systems and created something new. One expert, Dr. Helena Voss from the University of Washington's Department of Astronomy, made an observation that sent the investigation in a completely new direction. She noticed that if you plotted the symbols according to their position in the circle and assigned them coordinates based on the lighthouse's geographic location, they corresponded to star positions. Specifically, star positions as they would appear from Mercer's Bay on the night of March 14, 2019, at exactly 11:47 p.m. Detective Chan obtained security footage from several businesses in Mercer's Bay that had cameras facing north, with views toward the lighthouse. She spent hours reviewing footage from March 14th and 15th. And she found something impossible. At 11:47 p.m. on March 14th, every camera simultaneously experienced the same glitch. For exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds, the footage showed nothing but static. When the cameras resumed normal recording at 11:50 p.m., there was a light visible at the top of the lighthouse. A bright, pulsing light that shouldn't have been there, because the lighthouse's beacon had been removed in 1987. The light pulsed 7 times, each pulse lasting approximately 3 seconds, then went dark. It never appeared again. But here's what really troubles investigators. During those 3 minutes and 17 seconds of static, according to the timestamps, 7 different security cameras in 7 different locations all showed the exact same pattern of static. Not similar patterns. Identical. Frame by frame, pixel by pixel, the static was the same. The probability of this occurring naturally, according to digital forensics experts, is so close to zero that it might as well be impossible. Then there's the matter of the lighthouse keeper's log. When the lighthouse was operational, keepers maintained daily logs of weather conditions, maintenance activities, and notable events. The last entry in the official log was dated November 30th, 1987, the day before the lighthouse was decommissioned. That log was housed in the County Historical Society's archives. But forensic investigators found another log, hidden in a sealed metal box beneath the lamproom floor. A log that shouldn't exist. The box was discovered only because the metal floor had been so thoroughly cleaned that officers noticed a nearly imperceptible seam in the flooring. Inside the box was a leather-bound journal. The last entry was dated March 14, 2019. One day before the 7 were discovered. The handwriting was old-fashioned, the kind you'd see from someone educated in the early 20th century. The entry read, "They have come, as was foretold. 7 souls drawn to this place by forces they cannot comprehend. I have prepared the circle as instructed. The stars align tonight as they last aligned in 1891, and will not align again for another 128 years. What they will witness, what they will become, is beyond my understanding. I am merely the keeper of this threshold, as those before me have been, stretching back through the centuries. May God have mercy on their souls, for they walk now between worlds." The entry was signed, J.H. Analysis of the paper and ink suggested the journal itself dated to approximately 1920, but the final entry's ink was fresh. Less than a week old when the journal was found. Detective Chan tracked down genealogical records. From 1887 to 1987, the Beacon Point Lighthouse had 7 different keepers. The second keeper, serving from 1919 to 1934, was a man named Jonathan Holloway. His signature matched the J.H. in the journal. Jonathan Holloway died in 1961 at the age of 87. He was buried in Mercer's Bay Cemetery. I visited that grave myself, 2 months ago. It's undisturbed. Jonathan Holloway is still there, resting where he's been since 1961. So who wrote that entry in March 2019? Detective Chen is not a woman who believes in coincidences, but she's willing to accept them when evidence demands it. What she couldn't accept was the pattern that emerged when she started digging into the lighthouse's history. I'm going to share with you information that wasn't released to the public. Information that's still classified as part of an ongoing investigation. Detective Chen requested records from the National Archives, specifically any documents related to unusual incidents at coastal lighthouses along the Pacific Northwest. What she found was disturbing. In March 1891, exactly 128 years before the current case, there was an incident at a lighthouse in Cape Disappointment, Washington. 7 individuals were found at the base of the lighthouse tower, all in a catatonic state. The local newspaper report from March 17, 1891, described them as struck by a malady of the mind, their eyes open but seeing nothing of this world. All 7 recovered within 2 days, but could provide no explanation for how they arrived at the lighthouse or why. In March 1763, another 128 years earlier, there are records from a British colonial settlement near what is now Astoria, Oregon. A journal entry from a settler named Thomas Wickham describes finding 7 members of the local indigenous tribe in a state of living death near a rocky promontory where, according to tribal oral history, sacred ceremonies were performed during specific celestial events. Detective Chen consulted with Dr. Marcus Reynolds, an astrophysicist at Caltech, about the 128-year cycle. Dr. Reynolds spent 3 weeks running calculations based on the orbital mechanics of our solar system, the precession of Earth's axis, and the positions of various stars visible from the Pacific Northwest coast. His findings: every 128 years, a specific alignment occurs. 7 stars, Sirius, Arcturus, Vega, Capella, Rigel, Procyon, and Betelgeuse, form a specific geometric pattern when viewed from latitudes between 45 and 48 degrees north, which includes Mercer's Bay, on the night of March 14. The alignment lasts for approximately 3 minutes. The 7 stars. The 7 people. The 7 symbols carved into the lighthouse floor. But Dr. Reynolds cautioned Detective Chen, this alignment is interesting from an astronomical perspective, but it's important to understand that these stars are not physically connected to each other. They're at vastly different distances from Earth, moving in different directions, at different speeds. From our perspective, they appear to form a pattern, but that's purely a matter of viewpoint. There's no physical reason why this alignment should cause anything to happen on Earth. Yet something did happen. Something that's happened before, following a precise 128-year cycle. Detective Chen then did something that violated protocol but which she's never regretted. She sat down with all 7 individuals simultaneously. Medical staff advised against it, worried about potential psychological harm or the possibility that the 7 might reinforce each other's delusions. But Detective Chen insisted. She arranged for them to meet in a conference room at the hospital on March 22, 1 week after they were found. It was the first time all 7 had been in the same room since the lighthouse. I've watched the video of this meeting dozens of times. The moment they were all present, there was a shift. You could see it in their faces, their body language. Recognition, even though they maintained they'd never met before. Detective Chen asked them to describe what they remembered from the lighthouse. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then Ashley Kim, the psychology grad student, said something that made everyone in the room go silent. We were waiting for the door to open. What door? Detective Chen asked. Thomas Brennan answered. The door between. The one that opens when the stars remember their first pattern. Lucia Morales continued, as if they were tag-teaming. We were supposed to witness. That's why we were called. Someone needed to see, to remember, to carry forward. Carry forward what? Detective Chen pressed. This time, all 7 spoke in unison again, their voices overlapping. The knowledge that we are not alone. That we have never been alone. That they are coming back. The room fell silent. Then David Okonkwo, the journalist, added in a quiet voice. In 2147. March 14th. When the stars align again. 7 more will be called. And then, finally, the door will fully open. Detective Chen ended the interview shortly after. The hospital staff noted that following the meeting, all 7 individuals began to recover more rapidly. Within 3 days, they were discharged. Within a week, they had all returned to their respective homes and lives. But here's the thing that troubles Detective Chen most. All 7 of them changed their lives after the incident. Thomas Brennan quit his software engineering job and enrolled in astronomy courses. Lucia Morales changed her major from marine biology to astrophysics. Christopher Yates, despite being retired, started volunteering at the local planetarium in Boise. Naomi Park began taking night classes in archaeology, specifically studying ancient astronomical observatories. Marcus Wells restructured his entire history curriculum to focus on ancient civilizations and their understanding of the cosmos. Ashley Kim shifted her psychology research to focus on collective consciousness and shared experiences. David Okonkwo scrapped his book about coastal communities and started writing about ancient astronomical knowledge. 7 people, all redirecting their lives toward the stars. In the months following the incident, Detective Chen pursued every lead, no matter how strange or unlikely. She interviewed historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, astronomers, psychologists, and even parapsychologists. She traveled to Cape Disappointment to investigate the 1891 incident, obtaining century-old newspaper archives and private journals from descendants of those involved. What she found was that the 1891 7 also changed their lives after their experience. All 7 became obsessed with the stars, with ancient knowledge, with preparation for something they couldn't quite articulate. One of them, a woman named Clara Hodges, wrote in her diary in 1920, "I am now 62 years old, and I know I will not live to see the next alignment. But I have taught my daughters what I learned in that moment at the Lighthouse, even though I cannot fully explain it. When 2019 comes, 7 will be called again, and they must be allowed to witness. The cycle must continue unbroken, or humanity will face the arrival unprepared." Detective Chen located Clara Hodges's descendants. Her great-great-granddaughter, Emily Hodges, lives in Seattle. Emily knew nothing about her ancestors' experience at Cape Disappointment. But when Detective Chen showed her the diary entries, Emily went pale. "My grandmother," Emily said, "she died when I was 12, but she used to tell me the strangest thing. She'd wake me up on clear nights and take me outside to look at the stars. She'd say, 'Emily, remember them. Remember their patterns. Someday, you might be called to remember for all of us.' I always thought she was just being poetic, you know? A sweet old lady who loved astronomy. But now..." Detective Chen asked Emily about any family records, any other diaries or letters that might shed light on Clara's experience. Emily provided boxes of family documents. Most were mundane: letters, receipts, photographs. But there was one item that stood out: a hand-drawn star chart, dated March 15, 1891. The stars were marked with symbols. The same 7 symbols found carved into the floor of the Beacon Point Lighthouse. On the back of the chart, in Clara's handwriting, "They showed us our own sky, but as they see it. 7 points of light that mark the path. 7 witnesses in each cycle. 40 cycles since they first came. 40 cycles until they return in earnest. We are cycle 39. Those who come in 2019 will be cycle 40. The next cycle will be the last." Detective Chen sat in her office, doing the math. If each cycle is 128 years, and there have been 39 cycles before 2019, that means the first cycle occurred around 134 AD. The Roman Empire. Ancient China. The time of Emperor Hadrian. She expanded her research, looking for any historical records of groups of 7 people found in altered states near astronomical observation sites around the year 134 AD. What she found was fragmentary, but suggestive. Roman records mention a group of 7 oracles at Delphi who fell into a simultaneous trance during certain astronomical events. Chinese historical texts reference 7 scholars who achieved enlightenment together while observing the 7 wandering stars, which might refer to the 7 brightest stars visible from China. There are even references in Sanskrit texts to 7 sages who received knowledge from the sky. But these are scattered references, tantalizing hints, not proof of any kind of continuous cycle or pattern. Detective Chin also investigated whether there might be more recent cycles that went unreported or were attributed to other causes. She found several intriguing possibilities. In March 1635, there's a brief mention in colonial Massachusetts records of 7 individuals found in a state of divine rapture near a coastal promontory. No follow-up records exist. In March 1507, Spanish colonial records from what is now California mention 7 indigenous people found entranced by the heavens at a specific coastal location during a religious ceremony. Each time, 7 people. Each time, near the coast. Each time, in March, at 128-year intervals. The pattern holds, stretching back through time. But here's what keeps Detective Chen awake at night. What's turned this from a missing persons case into an obsession? If the pattern is real, if there really is some kind of cycle that calls 7 people to witness something we don't understand, then what happens in 2147? According to Clara Hodges's note, that's cycle 40. The last cycle. The cycle when they return in earnest. Who are they? Return from where? And what have these 7-person groups been witnessing for nearly 2,000 years? Detective Chan interviewed each of the 7 from the 2019 incident again, separately, 6 months after the Lighthouse event. She asked them if they remembered anything more, any details that might have surfaced in dreams or during therapy sessions. All 7 reported the same thing: increasing vividness of dreams involving stars, light, and the sensation of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. Thomas Brennan described it as like being a cell in a body, suddenly becoming aware of the organism we're part of. Ashley Kim said, "It's the feeling that consciousness is bigger than we thought, that maybe we're all connected to something ancient and vast that's been trying to communicate with us forever." But the most disturbing response came from David Okonkwo, the journalist. When Detective Chen asked him what he thought the Lighthouse incident meant, David looked at her with haunted eyes and said, "Detective, what if we're not investigating a crime? What if we're investigating first contact? What if something has been trying to communicate with humanity for thousands of years, using the only language that transcends time and culture, the stars themselves? And what if these 7-person groups throughout history have been like ambassadors or interpreters? People who are somehow sensitive to this communication in ways the rest of us aren't. Every 128 years, during this specific stellar alignment, the signal is strongest. 7 people get called, get chosen, get activated, whatever you want to call it. They witness something, they experience something, and they spend the rest of their lives trying to prepare humanity for the next cycle. But here's what terrifies me, Detective. What if the cycle is building toward something? What if each group of 7 adds to some kind of collective knowledge or preparation? And what if in 2147, when the 40th group is called, that's when everything changes? That's when the door that's been slowly opening for 2 millennia finally opens all the way. Detective Chin asked him what he thought would come through that door. David Okonkwo smiled sadly. "I don't know. But I think we were being shown. In those moments at the Lighthouse, when we were all together in that circle, when the light pulsed 7 times, I think we were being shown what's waiting on the other side. And I think we were meant to forget, but not completely. We were meant to carry just enough memory to pass it forward, to make sure the next 7 are ready." "Ready for what?" Detective Chen asked. "For the day when humanity has to decide if we're ready to step through that door ourselves. Detective, what if we're not investigating a crime? What if we're investigating first contact? What if something has been trying to communicate with humanity for thousands of years, using the only language that transcends time and culture, the stars themselves? And what if these 7-person groups throughout history have been like ambassadors or interpreters? People who are somehow sensitive to this communication in ways the rest of us aren't. Every 128 years, during this specific stellar alignment, the signal is strongest. 7 people get called, get chosen, get activated, whatever you want to call it. They witness something, they experience something, and they spend the rest of their lives trying to prepare humanity for the next cycle. But here's what terrifies me, detective. What if the cycle is building towards something? What if each group of 7 adds to some kind of collective knowledge or preparation? And what if in 2147, when the 40th group is called, that's when everything changes? That's when the door that's been slowly opening for 2 millennia finally opens all the way. Detective Chin asked him what he thought would come through that door. David Okonkwo smiled sadly. I don't know. But I think we were being shown. In those moments at the lighthouse, when we were all together in that circle, when the light pulsed 7 times, I think we were being shown what's waiting on the other side. And I think we were meant to forget, but not completely. We were meant to carry just enough memory to pass it forward, to make sure the next 7 are ready. Ready for what? Detective Chen asked. For the day when humanity has to decide if we're ready to step through that door ourselves. The Lighthouse case remains officially unsolved. 7 people experienced something at Beacon Point Lighthouse that defies conventional explanation. Were they the victims of some elaborate hoax? Some natural phenomenon we don't yet understand? Or were they, as they believe, witnesses to something profound and cosmic? Detective Sarah Chen doesn't know. After 23 years of solving cases, of finding answers, of bringing closure to families and justice to victims, she finally encountered something that couldn't be neatly wrapped up and filed away. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe they're meant to humble us, to remind us that for all our technology and knowledge, we're still looking up at the stars with the same wonder and confusion as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. The 7 individuals from the lighthouse have moved on with their lives, but they carry with them the memory of that night, the weight of being part of something larger than themselves, and the responsibility of preparing the way for those who will come after. In 2147, 7 more will be called. The cycle will continue, or perhaps it will complete. The door will open further, or perhaps it will finally swing wide. And humanity will learn whether we've been preparing for a revelation or a reckoning. This has been the story of the case that still keeps the investigators awake. The case that has no ending. Only a waiting. A watching. A preparation for what comes next. Before we end, I need you to help spread this story. If this case has gripped you the way it's gripped me, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Every subscription helps us continue investigating cases like this one. And now, I have a question for you, and I want you to really think about this. If you were called, if you felt that irresistible pull to drop everything and travel to a place you'd never been for reasons you couldn't explain, would you go? Would you trust that call from something beyond your understanding? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts on this. Remember, the truth isn't always simple. Sometimes it's not even comfortable. But it's always worth pursuing. Until next time, keep questioning. Keep investigating. And keep looking up at those stars. Because they might be looking back. The Lighthouse case remains officially unsolved. 7 people experienced something at Beacon Point Lighthouse that defies conventional explanation. Were they the victims of some elaborate hoax? Some natural phenomenon we don't yet understand? Or were they, as they believe, witnesses to something profound and cosmic? Detective Sarah Chen doesn't know. After 23 years of solving cases, of finding answers, of bringing closure to families and justice to victims, she finally encountered something that couldn't be neatly wrapped up and filed away. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe they're meant to humble us, to remind us that for all our technology and knowledge, we're still looking up at the stars with the same wonder and confusion as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. The 7 individuals from the lighthouse have moved on with their lives, but they carry with them the memory of that night, the weight of being part of something larger than themselves, and the responsibility of preparing the way for those who will come after. In 2147, 7 more will be called. The cycle will continue, or perhaps it will complete. The door will open further, Or perhaps it will finally swing wide. And humanity will learn whether we've been preparing for a revelation or a reckoning. This has been the story of the case that still keeps the investigators awake. The case that has no ending. Only a waiting. A watching. A preparation for what comes next. Before we end, I need you to help spread this story. If this case has gripped you the way it's gripped me, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Every subscription helps us continue investigating cases like this one. And now, I have a question for you, and I want you to really think about this. If you were called, if you felt that irresistible pull to drop everything and travel to a place you'd never been for reasons you couldn't explain, would you go? Would you trust that call from something beyond your understanding? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts on this. Remember, the truth isn't always simple. Sometimes it's not even comfortable. But it's always worth pursuing. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and keep looking up at those stars. Because they might be looking back.